The average McDonald's in America sells about $4 million of food a year. The person who owns it, who signed a $2 million loan, who works 60 hours a week, who fires people and hires people and mops the lobby at midnight, takes home around $150,000. McDonald's Corporation takes about $570,000 from that exact same store for doing none of that. And here's the part almost nobody knows. Only about $160,000 of it is the franchise royalty. The rest is rent. Before you sell a single Big Mac, here's the bill. Total initial investment, $1,470,500 to $2,728,000. That's the current franchise disclosure document, the legal document McDonald's must hand you before you're allowed to sign anything. Inside that, a $45,000 franchise fee. Equipment, signs, seating, decor, opening inventory, training travel. But the real gate is the cash. McDonald's requires $750,000 in non-borrowed, unencumbered personal funds, and that number specifically excludes another $100,000 you need for working capital. Not equity in your house, not a loan, not an investor, cash you already have, that you own outright, that you can afford to lose. And McDonald's does not allow partnerships, not with a friend, not with your sibling. You apply as an individual, or you don't apply. So before we talk about profit, understand the filter. You need the better part of $1 million in liquid cash, and then you take on debt for the rest. Now, what do you actually get for that? You get a 20-year agreement. You get a building McDonald's chose, and you get a menu, a supply chain, and a price list you don't control. You do not get the land. You do not get the building. Hold on to that. It's the whole video. Here's the part nobody tells you, and it's genuinely strange when you see it written down. You don't buy a McDonald's. You audition for one. It starts with an application and 2 rounds of interviews. If you get through those, you enter the training program, 6 to 12 months, working inside an actual McDonald's restaurant. Roughly 1,600 hours in the Canadian version of the program. Flipping, cleaning, running shifts, closing. That training is unpaid. Not underpaid. Unpaid. And you cover your own costs. McDonald's own franchising site lists mileage and gas as your responsibility. They assign your training restaurant. It's typically within 45 minutes of your home, and it is deliberately not your neighborhood location. Meanwhile, McDonald's asks you to divest of all existing business interests. Whatever else you own, whatever else pays your bills, sell it. And be prepared to relocate, depending on where a restaurant becomes available. So, quit your career, liquidate your other holdings, hand over proof of $750,000 in cash you cannot borrow, and work for free for up to a year. Then what? Then, and I'm quoting the structure of their own process here, after you complete training, McDonald's, in its sole and absolute discretion, will inform you of available opportunities for purchase. Sole and absolute discretion. After the year, after the money, after you sold your other business. And you don't pick where. McDonald's states plainly that it does not franchise territories and does not work with applicants who want a specific location or a limited geographic area. Their development team selects the site, they acquire the property, they build the building, then they award it to the candidate they like best. You've now spent a year and most of your liquid net worth applying for the privilege of becoming a tenant in a building you'll never own, in a town you may not have picked. Everyone focuses on the $2 million. The $2 million is the easy part. Okay, you're in. Let's look at the money, because McDonald's publishes the real numbers. They're legally required to. In the FDD, there's a section called Item 19. It contains a pro forma built from 11,332 real franchisee restaurants, actual financial statements from actual owners. At a store doing $3.2 million in annual sales, that pro forma shows operating income before occupancy costs of $812,000. $812,000. That's 25.4%. On a burger restaurant, that's a fantastic number, better than almost any restaurant on earth. Food cost, paper, crew payroll, utilities, insurance, the 4% advertising fee, all of that is already paid. $812,000 is what's left. So why does the owner only take home $150,000? Look at that phrase again. Operating income before occupancy costs. Before occupancy. Before rent. McDonald's defines it as excluding rent, the service fee, depreciation, interest, and income taxes. Everything that kills you is on the other side of that line. Let's take the $812,000 apart. Royalty, the service fee, 4% of gross sales. On $3.2 million, that's $128,000. Gone. Rent, approximately 10.7% of gross sales. On $3.2 million, that's $342,000. Gone. Read those two numbers next to each other. The rent is nearly 3 times the royalty. Everyone thinks a franchise is about the brand license, that the 4% is the price of the golden arches. The 4% is almost a rounding error next to what McDonald's charges you to stand inside the building. And I can prove this from the corporate side, not just the franchisee side. Go to McDonald's 2025 annual report. In the United States, franchisees generated $51.9 billion in sales. From that, McDonald's collected $7.37 billion in franchised revenue. Divide it. 14.2%. McDonald's takes 14 cents of every single dollar that crosses the counter at a U.S. franchised restaurant. 4 of those cents are royalty. The other 10 are rent. So back to our $812,000. Subtract $342,000 of rent and a $128,000 of royalty, and you're at $342,000. Before depreciation, before interest on your $2 million loan, before taxes. Run those, and the majority of franchisees land at roughly $150,000 a year. On $3.2 million of sales, that's a net margin of under 6%. You built a $4 million business to make what a good dentist makes. And one more thing about that 6%. You don't control the top line. McDonald's dictates which suppliers you buy from. When corporate runs a national promotion, 2 for $5, a dollar menu, whatever, you run it, at their price, on their dates. Whether it works in your market or not, you carry 100% of the labor cost, 100% of the operating risk, and roughly 0% of the pricing power. This isn't an accident. It's the founding design, and it's almost 70 years old. In the 1950s, Ray Kroc was expanding fast and going broke, collecting a tiny slice of franchise revenue while carrying all the debt. A CFO named Harry Sonneborn looked at the books and restructured the entire company around one idea. McDonald's buys or leases the land, then leases it back to the franchisee at a markup. Sonneborn's own description of the business, "We are in the real estate business." He said the only reason they sold hamburgers was that hamburgers were the best way to generate the revenue tenants used to pay rent. In 1956, he created Franchise Realty Corporation. It saved the company, and look at what it built. As of the end of 2025, McDonald's owns approximately 56% of the land and approximately 80% of the buildings across its consolidated markets. Here's the mechanism, and it's beautiful and merciless. McDonald's finances the property at long-term fixed rates, but your rent is a percentage of your sales. So when inflation hits and you raise your prices, McDonald's rent goes up. When you run a brilliant promotion and sales jump 15%, McDonald's rent goes up. Their cost on that building doesn't move. Yours does. You are not a business partner. You are a tenant with a performance bonus that pays them. And if you want to know what being a tenant really means, watch what happened when McDonald's decided the buildings needed updating. The program was called Experience of the Future. Kiosks, new furniture, curbside pickup, redesigned drive-thrus. McDonald's wanted it in nearly 14,000 U.S. restaurants. Cost per store, according to McDonald's own figures, $160,000 to about $750,000. Some buildings were old enough that the remodel meant demolishing the restaurant and rebuilding it from scratch. McDonald's paid 55%. The franchisee paid the rest, which, at the top of that range, is over $330,000 out of an owner's pocket, on a building the owner does not own and never will. And when McDonald's extended the deadline to 2022, the deal got worse. Finish in 2021 or 2022 instead of 2020, and their contribution drops from 55% to 40%. Take longer, pay more. So in October 2018, something happened that had never happened in McDonald's history. 400 franchisees formed the National Owners Association, the first independent, self-funded franchisee association the company had ever had. By the second meeting, reporting suggested as many as 1,300 operators, 3/4 of the entire U.S. system, were expected to attend. A survey by analyst Mark Kalinowski around that time found that nearly 9 out of 10 franchisees were unsatisfied with their cash flow and said McDonald's was launching too many expensive initiatives that didn't pay off. In January 2019, the NOA sent its members a memo about the remodels. The instruction was 3 words long: stop everything not already in the works. But here's the number that explains all of it. Franchisees were reportedly told that as many as 40% of them were at risk of not having their leases renewed if the sales lifts from those remodels didn't materialize. Sit with that. The remodel wasn't a suggestion. Refuse to spend $330,000 renovating your landlord's building, and your landlord might not renew your lease, and your lease is your business. That is the entire thesis in one event. Not a franchisor and a franchisee negotiating. A landlord and a tenant, and only one of them owns the door. McDonald's did back off. They extended deadlines, renegotiated the Uber Eats commission, made real concessions. The system works, but it only worked because 3/4 of the operators had to organize against it first. Now put the two businesses side by side. Same stores, same fries. The franchisee, $3.2 million in sales, roughly 6% net margin. McDonald's Corporation, 2025. Operating margin of 46.1%. On the franchise side specifically, it's even starker. McDonald's collected $16.5 billion in franchised revenue and paid $2.6 billion in occupancy costs against it. That's a franchised margin of $13.9 billion, about 84%. 84 cents of every rent and royalty dollar drops straight through. Meanwhile, the whole system did $139.4 billion in system-wide sales in 2025. McDonald's only booked $26.9 billion of that as its own revenue, and turned it into $8.56 billion of net income. They don't want the $139 billion. The $139 billion comes with employees and grease traps and lawsuits and minimum wage legislation. They want the 14 cents. And here's the proof that they know exactly what they're doing. McDonald's still runs about 5% of its stores itself. Look at what those earn. In 2025, U.S. company-owned restaurants did $3.1 billion in sales and produced a restaurant margin of $360 million. That's 11.6%. And it fell 14% year over year. McDonald's is better at running McDonald's than anyone alive, and running the restaurant is still the worst business in the building. That's why they've spent 2 decades refranchising, selling the operations, keeping the deed. They didn't franchise because they couldn't manage 45,000 restaurants. They franchised because being the landlord is a 46% margin business, and being the operator is an 11% margin business. Because $150,000 per store was never the point. The average McDonald's franchisee owns around 8 restaurants. 8 times $150,000 is $1.2 million a year. And now the math looks very different. Corporate overhead spreads. You hire supervisors instead of working the line. You stop being an operator and start being an owner. And when you exit, you're not selling a job. You're selling cash flow at a multiple. Franchisees also have something genuinely rare. The safest tenant relationship in retail. In 2025, McDonald's opened 2,276 restaurants, closed 396, and grew system-wide sales 7%. Existing operators get first look at new stores. And the brand works. U.S. average unit volume climbed from $3 in 2023 to about $4.06 million in 2025. So the deal is real. It's just not the deal people imagine. You are not buying a money printer. You are buying a low-margin, high-revenue operating business, at scale, from a landlord who takes the first 14 cents and never takes a risk. $4 million in, about $150,000 out for the person who owns it, about $570,000 out for the company whose name is on the sign, and roughly $410,000 of that is rent, not royalty. The 4% you think you're paying for the golden arches? That's the cheap part. The expensive part is the dirt underneath you. You'll never own it. You'll pay more for it every year you succeed. You'll renovate it on their schedule with your money. And on the day your 20-year agreement ends, McDonald's still holds the deed. Next up, how much money a car wash actually makes. Where the margins are so good, they'll make this video look like a tragedy. Subscribe so you catch it.